Okay, now we go into part 3 of the origins of pre-dynastic Egypt. We're still here with David Roll and showing his connections that he thinks he's found with the Sumerians. Then whenever you add what I've added to it so far, it starts to get pretty undeniable, but it gets worse or better, whichever way you want to look at it. And let's just continue with this.
Massive beards. Isn't that weird? Egyptians don't naturally grow big, thick beards, and yet always the pharaohs are shown with these false beards attached to their chins. Why is that? Where does that come from?
Well, I want to tell you where that comes from. Let's see. Let me show you Menes or Narmer is supposed to be the original pharaoh that had ever come to Egypt. And see if you can see it in there. There's a Louvre exhibit right here that shows you a Sumerian priest king with a big beard on him. This little thing sticking out of the middle of his chest is where his arms are supposed to be clasped in front of him in the classic Sumerian stance. And this is at the Louvre Museum itself. You can see it in a few of these videos here. So another thing that's a little telling here too is the Dendera zodiac that they have there. They found out by looking at it and figuring out the ancient Babylonian one that I showed you with the Epic of Gilgamesh and so on, that it's a copy of that one. Definitely. You look at King Narmer here, and let me just get in on this a little bit. You look at that, and you can't say that that's not a Caucasian. But also, we're at the Louvre, or where I've typed in the Louvre, and again, there is that mummy that's not from Egypt. There is that mummy that's from the Near East. Definitely shows you the Horus symbol that's on it, lotuses, arms crossed, bound quite well. It's quite neat. But let's just look at a moment of my video here that I've got on this.
If you've been studying.
And you look into this, this is Manus Susa, and this is the way he originally looks. That's just a drawing of it when they originally found it. Here you see it's lapis lazuli inlaid, and you see this larger chin beard that the Sumerians have on themselves right there, right? Now let me blow this up. I don't know why I'm leaving it small for you, but because it's still hard enough to see. But you can see that effect that's there. And what is that? And what's this little stick part sticking out here in the middle? His two arms are coming down, but what does this relate to? Well, there are Sumerian priest kings, there they are, with their arms clasped, and they have the lapis lazuli eyes and so on. And it's pretty telling. And you look, and there's lots and lots of these Sumerian priest kings that all have that look. Especially the more ancient ones have that exact same look that starts to look very much like it. And this even has a lotus blossom bottom on it. So that's kind of neat and unique. But you see that gesture go all the way up through, and then later it starts to look a little more like this. Same gesture though, same stick, and if you get around and look at it, that little stick that's sticking out that keeps his arms from breaking so easily during sculpting is still there. They leave that prong in there perhaps. They know that whenever they keep trying to break it out, maybe it breaks their arms off, and that's not too cool. But yeah, so Sumerian priest kings, where you see the guys like this, and their ancient beards and how they're done. And they're usually done with rolls though. Whenever you show the god guy, it's done in rolls that go down. And you see how the sides are curled in and curled in? So it's woven. It's a woven beard is what it is, right? Well, let's go back and let's just continue from there. But I want you to remember that as we continue to look at this. And now we're about to go out in the desert and look at some photographs, some actual archaeology.
They also have these boats, these funerary boats, which in this case is buried next to the Khufu pyramid. I swore I would not say pyramid, but I just have. And they are funerary boats designed to take the spirit of the god king to his rebirth. They are taxis that take you for your rebirth if you're a king.
And that's true. And you'll see right here, these people are pulling and leading it, and it's not in the water at all. And it's a symbolic thing. And, you know, they call this the solar boat. And this is just a little model here, by the way. When you look at the real thing, it's huge. It's huge. But even in the Rime of the Ancient Sailor and stuff, there are boats that are much longer. I think I figured that thing out once a long time ago to be like 86 yards long, like almost taking up a football field that they describe in there. It's not, it doesn't seem to be unique or like, well, the biggest one ever made. We tried to make Noah or anything. No, they just 86 yards long by almost 60 yards wide. Huge. People think that they only have these little bitty things here. Well, this is symbolic of that huge thing that you see there in these ancient boats. And even though it's made out of wood, the tip is still made to look like papyrus. And why do they do that? And why do they put head standards on top of these? Instead of it being the little papyrus end, they start putting heads and so on there. And where do you see that? And where do you see this hooked rear end? Well, you see it in Sumeria in their ancient reed boats that start things out. So they keep that look. If you look all the way up into the Spanish galleons and stuff, we keep a high-prowed, high-tailed, center swallow, shallow kind of look. Nowhere near like this. What we end up doing is we take this same boat right here, and we just panel the thing not from this height, but we panel it all the way up to this height. Boom, all the way down, and that becomes your modern boat. We put some weight down here in the bottom because it's too buoyant, and then now we've got that, and we actually have this whole thing up on top now. This is the current model, you know, the next step of it, but it literally is from this. Let's continue.
In the tombs, you see the same reed boats with their bunches of reeds tied together with rope, with the same shape, with the high prow and the incurved stern, taking the god, the king, to his rebirth on the eastern horizon.
And the sun rises in the east. It's a solar boat. This is in the sun god Ra and the sun god Jesus. Yeah, it's a thing. And you look at some other videos. I'm not going to go into explaining to you how Jesus is the sun god, and Sol Invictus, and so is Mithra, and so are a lot of these old gods that I've been showing you. If you haven't watched my other videos, then you're not caught up to where I'm talking about. But you see right here is Horus's statue. These are the followers of Horus, and there are different standards here. And there's the double plumes, ostrich plumes, and Horus, and they're dragging this thing out.
Another very strange feature is when you go to the tombs in Egypt. How many of you have been to Egypt? Only a few. That's interesting. When you go into the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, you will see that the god Atum, the ram-headed god, representing the king in this case, is in a cabin inside a boat with a high prow and incurved stern, being dragged by the gods on dry land, no water. Why is that?
Why is that? Well, it's a neat thing. It'll show you some symbology that goes with that and how they had it, and he will show you some too, and what the archaic belief or what the belief in the archaic thought is now. But you know, so the ram-headed god, which is Aries, has to do with Aryans, has to do with the golden age and these people dragging this boat along ground. And this one doesn't necessarily have a whole sled up under it, but usually if you'll look, they have sleds below a lot of them. And if you look at the ancient Book of the Dead process and so on, they would take a king and pull him around and through and down the causeways and so on, and when they did so, it would look much like this. People were saying, no, they carry him in a thing that's much like, you know, the Hindu deal where they bring him up on stanzas and they carry him and stuff. No, it's done in a boat deal like this, where he takes this symbolic ride. And then I'm guessing Khufu's boat got buried next to it and everything. But let's continue these boats. Just now getting into Sumerian reed boats.
What we have to do is we have to start thinking about not the west, where the bodies of the kings are buried, where the deceased are buried, but the east, because east is where rebirth takes place. East is where the sun rises every morning and is reborn. So the objective of the king, as his spirit when he dies, is to be buried in the west, to travel through the underworld, and to rise in the east with the sun. So creation, rebirth, is not in the west, it's in the east where the sun rises.
You'll find wise men came from the east. A lot of things came from the east. We've been talking about Proto-Indo-Europeans, and from most every place that we've occupied now in current modern, and even Egypt itself came from the east. Sumeria is east. India is east.
So we're looking for resurrection in the east, and that's where we're going to go now. We're going to go eventually to a place called the Isle of Flame. The Isle of Flame, logically, of course, is an island where you see the dawn light rising beyond the mountains, giving the idea of a flame or the light appearing. In a place the Egyptians called Light Land. So Light Land is where the dawn is, to the east.
It's the land of the rising sun, and that ought to sound familiar to most people. This is something that we have with Japan, and they have it with their flags still. And so why is it the land of the rising sun? Well, when the people are over here, the sun appears to rise from over there. You know, when you see a rainbow, you think it ends over there. So these people had an archaic belief that the sun was real close to the ground over there, and it went through a gate. And over here it went through a gate, and it went to the underworld around the bottom of the earth. And so it goes around the round top, goes around the round bottom, spheres, and so on. At first, people were thinking it was a much more of a flat model with somewhat of a dome over it. Your biblical model is a model that it looks pretty much like a paperweight type thing, or really, you know, the shaking mobiles that you have, that snow globes, basically, a snow globe. That's exactly what it was, and it had vents in the top of it. And in the Bible, they kind of allude to the idea that space is made of water, and God can let that water in and drown you, that you're trapped in a little bubble, like a bubble of spit floating on a pond, and you're in that special little thing. And it's on 4 pillars and all these things in the corners of the earth, and stuff that's written into the Bible that even at the time, the Greeks already knew that that was not a correct model. And we've gotten into that a couple of times in other videos, so I won't go into that, but the sphericalness of it, and we may touch upon it later. But this land that we talk about in this Island of Flame is alluded to in the Sumerians as being Dilmun. And where's Dilmun at? Well, it's at the end of their little delta leading right out in, just like the Nile delta that leads out here, and it's at the ending of that where they had, and this is Dilmun. And strangely, there's a little island that's there that Enki refers to, and he says that there it's an island of prosperity, and it's a beautiful, at the time, full of date trees and fruit and everything, and that there were no snakes on the island, and that, you know, kind of like Ireland, I guess, if you will, haha. But he says there's no snakes on the island and no predators of each other, and pretty much meek creatures. And so it's basically like a Garden of Eden, if you will, and that type of thing. It's mentioned there, although Eden itself is just the land and the fertile area of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. That's the name they had for it, Eden. Let's continue.
So we're going to find answers to this question, or these questions, to the east of the Nile, in what we call the Eastern Desert. And that's where we're going to go now.
In between there and the Red Sea.
The area we're talking about is between, in the north, Abydos, or Thinis, down the Nile, past Thebes, past Nekhen, one of the kingdoms, 2 of the main pre-dynastic kingdoms are Nubt and Nekhen, past Edfu, down to Komombo and to Aswan. So this zone here, between Abydos and Aswan on the eastern side, and this of course is the Red Sea here, this is the area we're going to look at now. You would think there was nothing in there, wouldn't you? Just desert. But actually in that area there is where Egypt began. There are 2 main wadi routes. The first one, from the Red Sea, comes out at Nubt, here, through the Wadi Hammamat. Nubt in Egyptian means gold town, so it's like the Klondike, okay? Nubt means gold town. And the second one...
It's where the idea of Nubia comes from. Whenever later they're farming up in this area here where I'm at, and this is considered to be Nubia, and farther down, and that's where they're looking for gold then, but they had first mined it a lot here, and they found a good stash of it here, or it could be the Golden City, but no, looked like that had been good with gold itself, like they kind of mentioned in the Bible a little bit, but that's a different place. Wadi Hammamat, kind of sounds weird, Ham, there's your Ham, but also Amat, Tiamat, Hammamat, So you get that idea. Wadi Kash, you get Kish, you get Kush later, that are Kushites that are way down in this range over in here. But this looks to you like there's just some jumble and you make it to the ocean. Really, between here and here, it only goes up some 140 meters at these main points that it runs through. There are actual ponds and things that come in there. What you're seeing is a little bit of clouds. And if you look, it's green over here. There is quite a bit of rain that happens. Whenever you get to really look at it, it's not really that green, but in comparison to a stark desert, it is. And you can see this inlet here, and it floods in all the way and runs up in a river that comes out and can spill out from here through here and edit out into here at times of great flood. And if it rains into here, this river fills up, and you're easily able to transverse this as it goes down the Nile. But of course, from this way, it's going out and down and up to the delta. But from up here in this midpoint, it's trying to go this way and down off into the Red Sea. And there's fishermen villages that have been noted in a few places here, even in a lot of the old maps that you see and things, and they talk about them, and the people that lived off phages, lived off fish. The word is phages, mean eaters and so on. But he's going to go out in this area and take a look at it.
Here's a Wadi Baramia, which leads to Nekhen, and also this is a gold mining area. So both here and here are the two main gold mine areas in ancient Egypt.
Aha.
Poor old Barry's going to be exhausted by the time we finish this. So if we look at a simplified map, you have the main transverse wadi from Nubt and Gebtu all the way to the Red Sea, and you have Nekhen and Neked on either side of the river going all the way to the Red Sea. The two main transverse routes. And of course, they represent the two earliest kingdoms in Egypt, the kingdom of Seth and the kingdom of Horus. The capital of the Horus kingdom is Nekhen, the capital of the Seth kingdom is Nubt. And when these two kingdoms are reunified, the new kingdom has its capital at Chenu, which is Abydos today. Greek name Abydos.
So that's where it reunifies. Whenever it all comes together, it doesn't come up here, it does go down here. And of course, later it needs to go even farther down and be more in the place that they're going to have worse contact with and have more of a centralized or be able to protect itself somewhat. But in from that enough to have some protection. But also this shows you Seth. Now Seth or Set, and it's recreated in Seti, beloved of Seth. It's believed that all the Sethites were all redheads, that Seth is known as a redhead. And if you watch my video on Typhon, that's right, it got ruined. I still haven't done it from Christmas. So Typhon and Seth are known to be the same thing as each other. It has to do with the volcano god in ancient, way archaic beliefs. And of course, a volcano burps out an orangish red hair, so it was given the idea of that, and that Sethites have something to do with that. The necropolises that are out there show you that people are buried blondes in one area, redheads in one area, and they actually have a decent redhead contingent, much that rivals Europe and even Ireland and so on. And the only other place you find it really in that strength, although you find remnants all over the Near East, is up at North Africa, over in the Amazigh area, and there's a certain contingent, not through the whole place, but in certain tribal areas that are still pretty much held to that belief there. But this shows you where kind of the boundary of Seth and Horus was originally, and later it still continues to be. A lot of people don't realize that once it did come together, which we're talking about leading into, that there were off periods, that there were intermediate periods, and then during those, a lot of times there was rulers of upper and lower, and they were still in conjunction with each other and still friendly, but at the same time they were separated. It wasn't under one, it wasn't one unified thing again. During each little great epoch, it became reunified again and became where it was all chugging as one engine.
Now don't get too excited, because Arthur Weigel is not a German. He has a German name, but he's actually an English explorer. He was Inspector of Antiquities at Luxor in the early 1900s, and in 1907 he went into the Eastern Desert. We're just going to follow his journey a little bit. He wrote about it in this book called Travels in the Upper Egyptian Deserts, and in there he illustrates some of the things that he found in the desert area. Now, I went out in this area in the 1990s with a team of people to survey the entire region. to look for rock art and prehistoric signs of civilization.
And you can tell it's just destroyed there now, pretty much desolation. But it wasn't in elder times. It used to rain quite a bit there. Now, if it rains there now, it'll start a flood running down these little wadis and riverlets things, and it can really take people out. And they tell you don't hang around in them, and surely not camp or put anything like that there with them. But in more ancient times, this was a much more tundra type area, and it had a lot more plant life, trees and things, and a lot more life than it does now, of course. And a lot of times when it would rain, it would fill up and puddle and make certain pools and connecting pools and riverlets that run through here. But really there seems to be only two connections that run through to each way, kind of like the passes, if you will. And
so here we are looking at an angle now, the kingdom of Nut and then Luxor right down to Edfu, and then the wadis which lead to the Red Sea over there.
So one comes out through here.
What Arthur did was he got married to an American.
One goes through here.
Called Hortense in Luxor, and for his honeymoon he took her into the desert. Not very nice of him. They camped in the desert for a week, and they were looking for various bits of evidence together. So I'm going to take you on that route. He went down by train down to Edfu, and he collected a couple of camels from there. His camel was called Gertrude. And they then hiked with their camels for 2 days to this place in the Wadi Baramia called Canais. Now Canais is an extraordinary place because in Canais is an amazing temple. So the area that we went to survey was from Canais going northwards all the way up to Nut. This whole area was surveyed over a period of about 8 years with a fleet of vehicles looking for rock art. Now, you can see here the temple of Canais. It's what we call a Spios temple. It's cut into the rock, and then the outer part is built out like this. It's dated to the time of King Seti I, who is the father of Ramesses II. Okay, so it's New Kingdom. But it was built there as a commemorative monument for the preservation of the gold mining workers, the army which came into the Eastern Desert to cut the gold out of the mountain, and they built this temple to the gods to celebrate that action.
What's neat about this, I caught it just after it did it though, but if you'll look, this is very columnated and looks very much not so Egyptian, even by this newer period here, and the way the columns are topped at the top of it, and it has those buttresses at the top. It looks a little more Greco-Roman, but it's not. It's from this period here, and perhaps it shows you some influences off of each other. But also the top crowning out like that could be a mimic of how the palm fronds and the lotuses do go out. But it's an interesting thing to go with this site and a few other major sites, but hundreds and hundreds of sites they found through there. This wasn't like a one-time deal either. And whenever it happened, it seemed like these people utilized this area for a while as they got Egypt going, and were kind of right there, if you will.
Well, they weren't the first people to arrive there. Here's the temple, and behind it is this massive cliff face here. And what we found was, or what Weigel found was, that when he came here to camp here, he was looking on this surface here, and he found hundreds of carvings, rock carvings, prehistoric rock carvings. Here we are looking at those very, very badly worn inscriptions. You can hardly make them out from this shot, but I'll give you a couple of examples.
He's going to show some examples, but look where he has to get up to and out on this ledge just to get up there where they're at and try to have good examples of them. And what they're going to do is kind of Photoshop the pictures where they make the background darker and the light ground lighter to end up getting out. The patina is still there where it shows you it's lighter and darker. All they do is really exaggerate a little bit. It's simple. It comes out fairly easy.
Examples of them. These are the types of things that Weigel found and copied into his book. The predominant thing you see there are boats. Lots and lots of boats. We call this one here the golf club boat because it has a golf bag with 4 clubs in it.
Now, see, he's going to show you a few other things, but what I'd like to show you out of this grouping here is there's ostriches, and there's groupings of them, which looks very much like what we first showed. Here's the skinny leg lady with her arms out, but they're not showing to be up. But look here where that family that has the golf clubs, as you called them, here have all their arms up. And on a lot of the boats that you find in depictions, there's one with the arms up. There's one with the arms up. There's that same symbology. Here it is again with the arms up. One end of the boat has a palm on the end of it. The other is hooked back. And that's that same boat that we've been looking at. Some are flat. These huge, there's ones that it looks like that this is huge, you know, and smaller ones and so on. A lot of different sizes of boats are involved in this. Just like I guess in warfare, you go all the way from aircraft carriers all the way down to smaller destroyers and stuff. But let's continue with this. You can also see here is a roped cattle, by the way, and or some of these have cattle on them whenever they bring them, or a cow's head sitting atop the thing, which starts that whole dragonish type image that you see in there at the end of these. Maybe more as a sign of war to intimidate people more as you show up than maybe having a palm tree. But
you'll notice that they all have a typical thing about them. They have the high prow and the incurved stern. They usually have a central cabin. They quite...
Never had bacon.
Really?
It ruins everything without bacon forever.
I love bacon.
I never get Hulu. Look.
Yeah, never
They
get
quite
Hulu.
often have a figure of a person with raised arms on them, and some of them have oars represented by these strokes, and possibly figures represented by the strokes above.
So the lines that are above are pretty much people, and then the bottom lines are like oars. And you see that all over the place. Well, in some places the oars aren't out, other ones they are. But, man, there's a lot of people that can fit in a lot of these boats.
And notice again you have these figures with the arms raised above the heads. You also see, incidentally, elephants, gazelle, ostriches, because in this time,
Ostrich.
which is called the subpluvial or the PreDynastic Neolithic wet phase, this area was savanna. And there were lots of animals and trees in the region.
See, even he says it.
So here we are recording one of the boats that Weigel found, and I'm going to show it you in detail to give you an idea of the sort of thing it is. Now, quite often when you get it in this condition, you see the patina is a little bit lighter than the rock surface. That's the sun tanning effect. So when this was carved in 3400 BC, around that time, it was white, and over the centuries it's become darker, almost back to the original colour of the rock. But if I get rid of the background, you see it a little bit better. Now, so we have a high prow, the flat bottom, and then the incurved stern. Sometimes we have an animal on the back, a totem. We have a central cabin, and we have a figure with raised arms above his head or her head, and quite often we have twin plumes on the head as well. Sometimes we have oars. Sometimes we have people, and then there's other things on here we can't explain. Dominic, like this, we never know what this is over here.
Not sure. I mean, it could be something as extravagant as telling you how many tribes are involved, and there's 4 of them, and each of those are a mace. It could be arrows stuck into there for usage if they ever need to. It could be a guiding device, and people have thought some weird things. I thought of weird when you ever use an actual bow nowadays where they have the sighting lining and so on to them, telling you at certain distances and everything, and it could be this is using the sky in some way as some type of distancing, like they always said that you had an hour left of sunlight whenever you had 2 fingers worth of light at arm's length before the sun went down. You had about an hour left, and a lot of times whenever you're out on the ocean going around the shoreline, you'd be like, all right, let's find a harbor, and things like that would go on. Does this have something to do with it? And again, the palming in that goes on here and so on. Let's continue though, that this shows you that same symbology that I showed you and from the start of this, and here's a continuity as all goes together. These people are carrying this thought.
But this is the general pattern of what we see.
Hundreds of them.
There are other examples. Look at this one here. This boat here is 1.5 meters in length from the carving, and it has
Huge.
some 46 crew members.
46 crew
It's a big
members it
ship.
denotes. But
We
there's
have
one right
fleets of
behind it with
ships.
like 28.
1, 2, 3, 4. This one has a main figure in the center. All of them have large crews.
Huge crews you could see in that. Look at this one.
This one is very interesting, because here we have oars with the paddle on them, we have palm fronds on the front, and we have two figures, this one, and they're both pointing in the direction of Egypt. Whenever we see these figures pointing, they never point away from Egypt, they always point towards Egypt. And you see there is a number of crew and they're rowing. It looks to me like they're rowing forward, not backwards. They're not rowing like this, they're rowing like this, pushing the boat.
I would say they're not pushing the boat. I say they're facing this way, but they're at the end of their stretch and they're pulling the oars back out and going back the other way. So no matter which way they're facing, the oars are always going to do that same action back and forth, and that's just facing that way. And yeah, okay, so wish you would have done the contrast on that one. It's pretty much bled out in my pics.
And you'll notice on the back, we have a bull standard on the back.
Yeah, the bull's head, which was shown in that one other one
It's a very
too.
large ship, again, about 47 crew members altogether. So they're battleships, they are not religious boats, they're not funerary boats, they are full of warriors. You wouldn't have ships that size as a funerary boat. This is the classic boat. This is one of the most important sights in the desert, and you see again the incurved stern, the vertical prow, the cabin, the figure with raised arms and twin plumes on the head, and quite often an animal at the back there.
There's that dragon iconography right there, and you also see this tied on and pulled down effect that's on this, which is helping to do it. There also is that same effect that goes on here, and at one time there's some lines that go from here to here, and that is believed to help start into the idea of them having sails. No sails are shown on this, but during this earlier time, what they were doing is the lines that come down from here, they were putting one on from here to here, or on the other side from here to here, and guiding the wind by that way. They were still able to utilize a sail type thing, but not the full standard that goes up. But sails do predate this date, though.
This one is so old and it's been exposed to the sun that the patination of the rock and the patination of the carving are almost identical. The only way you can really see it is because of the cutting back of the rock surface. If I clear the background again,
yeah, please do.
You can now see a high-prowed
there we go
boat with an incurved stern, a figure with raised arms, twin plumes, a cabin, and here you can see a very good bull with the four legs.
And there's also, well, right behind his hand here, is there only 3 instead of 4? So is this 3 tribes coming at once, 4 tribes coming at once?
So bulls have something to do with it.
Bulls do.
Figures with raised arms have something to do with it. Figures with plumes on their heads have something to do with this. And there's a central cabin, and they have this typical shape of the type of boat we see in the desert. So there's your bull at the back. If we compare that to the later palettes from the Nakada III period, or Dynasty 0, here we see the king represented as a bull,
Here's
smiting his enemies.
Very telling.
That's significant. That connects us from this to this. And you see the enemy has been overthrown, and you see the bull goring the enemy. This.
See, a lot of primordial people too, the bull was seen as the sire, right? He's the king bull, he's the sire, and this, by seeing it in their society of the cattle that they started domesticating and so on, they could tell this is the king bull, and in that same idea, this is the king man. Also, the lion is the king of the jungle, the lion is the king, of the beast or whatever, and so they use that effigy a lot too. But you see this bull idea. In fact, the God of the Bible is called Bull in many passages. I've got that in a video that's coming up too that shows you something about the Hyksos and the connections into Egypt and Exodus itself and so on. But these standards are odd here. He's going to tell you about it, but I'll tell you a little before so you can really look for it. These are long poles with an arm or a hand stuck on them, and they're holding onto the rope. So symbolically, the standards, what you would notice is the banners are of each one of these guys, which he's going to turn it sideways for us in a minute, are shown pulling this rope. Now, we don't have the other piece of the standard, but if we look at what we've been looking at so far, this rope is pulling a boat, a sacred boat. that probably has somebody with their arms raised up like this, but we don't have that piece anymore.
Section here I'm going to make horizontal for you so you can see it better. Here we see the followers of Horus, the standards. This one here is Wet, the opener of the ways. This is Anubis. This one is Thoth. This one is Horus. And this one is Min, the desert god. But that.
So Min, the desert god, that's where you get Menez from too. He took over that area and was the protector from anything coming that way, inward in. But yeah, this is the Shemsu Hor and the followers of Horus, and he's going to mention that in a minute.
Totems have hands on the end, and they're grasping a rope. Unfortunately, what they're pulling is missing from the stone, but they are dragging something. So the followers of Horus, the Shemsu Hor, who are associated with the arrival of the gods, are dragging something with a rope.
There you go.
So here we're going off in our vehicles, our Toyota Land Cruisers, out into the desert. We spend normally 4 to 5 days at a time, by which time we run out of water, we run out of fuel, and you try eating Egyptian bread after 5 days. You really want to go back to the Nile Valley after that time. So you travel through different types of terrain, but there's a lot of flat wadis and a lot of rock surfaces. The actual elevation from the Nile to the center of the desert is something like 40 meters, and it drops back to the Red Sea again. So
I'm sorry, I thought it was okay. I thought it was 140 feet, 40 meters. It's about 120 feet. It's 140 feet. That's the only difference. It goes from the height of the Nile to the height of the highest rocks in this area through here. You know, there's areas that are much higher than that. These mesas and things are much higher than that. But if you looked at the lowland area, you GPS that, how high are you above sea level? You're not really that 40 meters, you know, is where you get at your highest points. And so a lot of this, when it flooded out, would back flood into here too. So it shows you why there would be some boats through there, but also these dried up riverbeds are where they drug these boats down through all the way to the Nile. Strangely, and all through the route are pictures of such.
it's not a particularly steep incline. A typical example of the sort of work we do involves a real German, Hans Winkler, who was an explorer from this region. He did all this for the Robert Mondain exhibition in the 1930s, and this is his map here of what he actually discovered. All these places are rock art sites. You can see this is the Wadi Hammamat here, where he started work. That's number 1, number 2 there, 3, 4. So these are all the rock art sites he found. And we thought, oh, okay, the one we want to go to is site 26 down here. Piece of cake, look at it, it's easy. We just go along the tarmac road and we come down through here. There's nothing there. We can get there very quickly in a day, no problems. It took us 3 expeditions to find that site. And I'll tell you why when you see it a little bit closer. So we go closer, you think, this must be easy. What you've got to realize is that Hans Winkler didn't explore these areas. They're blank on his map because he didn't go there. So it looks falsely simple. It looks like you just have to come down here, past 24B, and arrive at site 26.
Yeah, he basically just says, I came down this one little rift and I followed it, but I took the left and then I took the left again and it came around over here and then I ended up over here. And then he, of course, goes in here looking, but you can get lost trying to find the way to make it to this point here. And apparently he did 3 times trying to find this. I'll give you a topographical map and show you how intricate it is. Hopefully it shows up. My glare's so high.
But let's just look at this little bit of the map on a modern cartographic map from the Egyptian government, and this is what it looks like. You try and find your way through that.
I don't know if you can tell that much.
There is site
Down here it's
26.
a little better, but
And we are coming in over there.
now from this point here, there's so many dead ends. If you were to take and try to play the maze game with it, and somebody said, all right, you're right here, try to get to right there. I mean, you can imagine how somebody would be driving around doing this crap like crazy. And while they're doing it, they're looking at every single rock face with a whole bunch of binoculars and so on like that, trying to see if they can find any stuff. And they're spending time doing it, not hoping they just drive right by the coolest thing. And so it took them quite some time. But they're coming from way up there, basically here, to way down here.
This is why it took us 3 expeditions to find it. So, Site 26 I'll now take you to. You'll notice the body opens up here. There was probably a lake in here originally, which is why the site is so important. So this is a lake bed, and the surface we're going to examine is this one here.
During floods, it would flood in. So we're hitting around 40, aren't we? Yeah, we just passed it. All right, guys, I tell you what, we're going to go on to part 4 on this. And before you leave, like this thing and everything. And if you have any comments, go ahead and leave them down there. We're going to have about 4 or 5 minutes before it goes, because it'll go on the 45. And it shouldn't be that long before the next one starts. It'll be up in your top left-hand corner right there. And if you need to go back to part 1, it's going to be in your top right-hand corner, as you see right now. Again, like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you there. Peace.